Okay.
Si por alguna razón les llega algún ruido extraño, es cuestión de moverse un poco porque pueden recibir interferencia.
Muchas gracias. Okay. ¿Ah? Sí, te doy la señal. So sorry about that. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. So, I'm Ismaela Magliotto. I'm the co-founder of the NGO 1.5. And I really want to thank you all for joining us today in this important moment. I think I have like a lot of interference when I'm speaking. So, this event happens during an historic milestone for the ocean, the ratification of the BBNJ Treaty. Treaty marks a turning point in how we understand and protect marine biodiversity in the high seas, and opens up a unique opportunity for Latin America, and in particular in Chile, to play a regional, scientific and diplomatic leadership on ocean conservation. Ocean is usually seen as an independent agenda, but with the BBNJ, it's an important momentum to see the ocean as the key to combat the planetary crisis. Before to start with this amazing panel, I would like to share with you some words that Thorsten Thiel shared with us before leaving Belém. He is the co-chair of the Expert Advisory Group on the BBNJ financial mechanism. So, let's play the video, please.
This COP is all about showing the connection between ocean and climate action. We are making great progress on ocean governance, but ocean governance needs to reflect the challenges that come from climate change. And as we design climate-smart ocean governance and ocean protection, we need to think in scale. So I'm very excited by the progress we've made around the BBNJ agreement. We now have a treaty for the high seas. It's all about making it happen, implementing. And so it's been great to see the engagement of ocean leadership from Latin America. Chile has been on the forefront of these discussions, and it's a really exciting opportunity to actually implement this ocean protection both in the coastal zones and beyond into the high seas. The ocean economy, the regenerative blue economy, is a huge opportunity, but that opportunity will only work if we connect it appropriately with protection. I visited Valparaiso myself, an amazing coastal town, and really set up for more steps in this direction. So let's work with ocean leaders, let's work with Chile and Latin America to actually get this off the ground, develop climate-smart ocean solutions, strengthen the regenerative blue economy. And as I am myself co-chair of the advisory group on the financial mechanism, I highlight the need for financial structures to actually put this in place. So I'm very excited that this panel is going on now, because it gives an opportunity to really discuss these points at the heart of the COP on Ocean Day, starting off with this really important discussion. So congratulations again to the organizers, and let this spark move us forward on ocean climate action.
Well, we thank you so much to Thiel for supporting us, and personally I can't be happier. I'm from Valparaiso and I love my city, I love my country, I love my region, and this opportunity to have the technical secretary of the BBNJ, I think it's an amazing opportunity. And you know, now I would like to introduce you to our amazing panelists of today. First, we have Lorelei Pickard. She is the Executive Director and of Ocean and Climate Platform and the Ocean Focal Point for the Marrakech Partnership. We also have Daniel Cáceres. He is a young ocean activist and regional representative for Latin America Sustainable Ocean Alliance. And also we have Janine Coy-Felsom. She is Deputy Permanent Representative of Belize to the United Nations and co-chair of the Preparatory Commission at the Regional Organizational Meeting of the BBNJ. So welcome you all. Please, a round of applause to our amazing speakers of today. So, to open the conversations, I would like to ask you, in the context of COP30, what does it mean for you to be moving towards effective implementation of the BBNJ Treaty?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Isma. Before I respond to your question, I do want to share a funny story, because we actually met thanks to Chile, thanks to Julio Cardano, just a few days ago, and Isma was running around being like, I need a woman, and I need a woman who can speak about ocean governance. And Julio turned to me and was like, she might be the person you need. And I was like, well, yeah, ocean governance is pretty much everything I do. I run the Ocean Climate Platform, which is very much designed to accelerate the inclusion of the ocean in the Paris Agreement. So Chile already brought us together, so I think that Chile should be the one bringing the BBNJ together as well, but of course I'm biased. To your point, I think that there are a lot of lessons learned that we can take from the climate agenda, from the way that we have mobilized across governments, but also across civil society, to make sure that we move from the global ambition into the implementation phase of the BBNJ Treaty. I just want to share two examples in the interest of time, but there were two game changers in terms of bringing the ocean climate agenda forward within the UNFCCC. The first one was ambition from countries. And Chile, in that front, together with many other countries like Monaco, like Panama, like Palau, Fiji, and so on and so forth, were the front runners in championing ocean issues. Already at COP21 in Paris, they launched the Because the Ocean initiative. It was a coalition of countries that grew from 20 to 45, I think, by the time we had the presidency, the Chilean presidency, to host COP25 in Madrid. But anyways, the idea is that to make sure the implementation of a treaty or their political momentum really meets the needs of that global agenda, we need ocean countries to champion it. So I do invite Chile and all of the other ocean champions to make sure that they put as much effort into the implementation of the BBNJ as they did for having the Paris Agreement to recognize the role of the ocean as the Earth climate regulator. And the second point is with regards to civil society. Every progress that has been made in the last decade to recognize that ocean climate biodiversity interactions has been supported by the work of NGOs, heavy rain, but also scientific communities, local communities, and everyone in the diversity of stakeholders that make this ocean community a remarkable one. So if there's one thing that I can suggest to have the implementation of the BBNJ treaty is to make sure that there is dedicated space for civil society to convene, to accelerate ambition, and to establish a very concrete and honest dialogue between countries, so parties, and the stakeholders who implement on the ground. It's about that dialogue is absolutely paramount for the success of the BBNJ treaty. So I'll stop here and hand over to my colleague.
No. You want me to continue?
Well, first of all, I hope you can hear me because I can't hear anyone else. I think the BBNJ agreement enters into force in January, and there are quite a number of issues that need to be addressed in order for it to be operational. This is the key time for leaders in our region, for persons who are going to be doing research, persons who are interested in conservation, those who are still early in career but see an opportunity through the blue economy. This is the opportune time to be involved in the construction of the institutions for the BBNJ agreement. And I want to pick up from that point that Lorelei just mentioned about who we're engaging with. One of the breakthrough moments of the BBNJ agreement was the fact that the agreement itself creates a whole new chapter of equity on the ocean and ocean governance. It is focused on states because states ultimately have to implement the agreement, but it drew in many different actors, and there's different consultation processes that will be necessary when conservation measures are going to be taken or other types of measures are going to be taken that will necessarily include other stakeholders, not just states. So it is really important that we recognize the BBNJ for what it brings in terms of equity in ocean governance. And then what it can then deliver in terms of opportunities for all of us in Latin America, in the Caribbean, across the globe, to be able to engage in solutions that address not only ocean, but also climate.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I think the BBNJ discussion is very key, specifically now in the context that we already have the 75 ratifications. That means BBNJ will go into force January 17th, which is going to be a key date for us. And I am from Peru, one of the only countries here that has not ratified BBNJ. So why is that important? First of all, I want to thank Lito, our congressman here from Peru. He's going to be leading the ratification process of Peru. So if everyone can say hi to Lito, our congressman over here. We need to push for him to ratify BBNJ in Congress pretty soon. The treaty will be going to Congress hopefully in the next week or in the next month, but it needs to happen before December if we want to be part of the first COP. If we want Peru to be part of the first COP. And I think this is a part that's very interesting and that I want to discuss with you guys, that we were discussing. I was talking with Marce today from Azul, Marce, a friend of mine who's in the back there, and she told me something that is very key, which is the order of the factors does affect the product. You know, the first COP is going to be a key COP in defining all the mechanisms that will be on high seas. All the mechanisms for the high seas treaty, the area-based management tools, the environmental impact assessments, the transfer of capacity, it's going to be seen all in the first COP. So we're thinking, how does it affect which countries have ratification until January 17th? For example, so there I was like discussing, is it really important to ratify it now or ratify it after January 17th? Because is it going to end up benefiting the main objectives? Because one of the things that we've seen in multilateralism is that we start with an objective, and then as time passes, we become farther away from the objective. And we lose the objective, and then it all becomes noise a lot in multilateralism. So I was talking to a delegate friend from Amsterdam, and she was telling me, you know, our delegations, in multilateralism, we usually just focus on the issue, we focus on what the science tells us is the issue, we focus what science tells us is a solution, and everything else for us is noise. And that is very true in that case. How can we prevent things like that to end up happening in the BBNJ negotiation? The BBNJ is focused on biodiversity on the high seas. How do we maintain that objective on biodiversity on the high seas? And one of the topics in Peru, for example, is actually the discussion there is like, it's not a fisheries treaty. It's not a fisheries treaty. And I'm like, yes, it's not a fisheries treaty, but it does benefit our fisheries. I mean, our Peruvian fisheries doesn't start inside the 200 miles. Most of them come from nutrients, come from currents outside the 200-mile range. And today what we have to do is prevent and reduce stressors and factors to biodiversity to maintain our fisheries and to maintain our services that nature provides constantly. And we already know that climate change is going to be a huge stressor on biodiversity in the high seas and a huge stressor on coastal areas overall. You know, all the science in deoxygenation, in acidification, in warming is giving us pretty rough scenarios for fisheries in coastal areas, which therefore tells us that it's going to be a very negative impact on the services provided for carbon sequestration already that the ocean provides. So we really need to do everything possible to reduce the factors of stress in biodiversity in the high seas and reduce factors of stress in biodiversity in coastal areas. So BBNJ is key on that. But to maintain that objective, I think that if we just go already with the first COP with the 75 countries that have already ratified it, I think that's going to be good enough in that. So I think that was a topic here that I wanted to discuss before we go into ratification.
Thank you so much for your amazing answers. I think that, as all of you said, the ocean is so important, and today is the thematic day of the ocean. And like and like with every person that I have met today, I was like, do you have 5 minutes to talk about the BBNJ? And some of my colleagues were like, you're talking too much about the BBNJ. And I was like, why not? The ocean is so important. Why not to talk about the BBNJ? Why not to talk about the ocean? I think it's so important, and sometimes we all need to do the effort that the ocean is not just the ocean pavilion. It's about how we put this in all the negotiations, in the heart of the climate action. So moving towards independent, the other questions. So Janine, I would like to start with you. So small island, developing state, and coastal nation of the Global South have been among the strongest advocates for the BBNJ Treaty and the ocean action. How can we ensure that they prioritize equity, benefit sharing, and capacity building remain at the center of the implementation phase?
Thank you. And I think the point that I was raising earlier about we're in this phase of the BBNJ agreement where we're laying down the foundation for operationalization. So we have a number of committees or subsidiary bodies. We have different types of processes that have to be elaborated. We have a special fund that needs to be established and operationalized. We have a clearinghouse mechanism, which is sort of the brain of the BBNJ agreement. Each one of those, from the subsidiary bodies to the processes to an actual mechanism to the financing, each one of those need to reflect the equity. So we can't entrench historical imbalances. We need to ensure that developing countries have an equal say in what is happening. And for SIDS, there are specific carve-outs within the BBNJ agreement that identify seats for small island developing states to be able to participate meaningfully in some of those bodies. So that's one thing. When it comes to the fund, we have the experience of the climate change funds. We know that it is difficult to access funds. So let's design the special fund appropriately now. That's how we will be able to address some of those issues around equity and capacity building, because the fund is supposed to support that, and benefit sharing. When we talk about marine genetic resources, a very critical component, part 2 of the BBNJ agreement, we have to design a fair and equitable benefit sharing mechanism that delivers not only non-monetary benefits, which are important. It's very important to build capacity, strength, knowledge, and science. But it also has to deliver monetary benefits. In a paper in 2018, 47% of all of patents that were related to marine genetic resources were held by one company. One company. That's just not right when we talk about the areas beyond national jurisdiction as being the common heritage of mankind. So we need to see that be a fair and equitable benefit sharing mechanism. The clearinghouse mechanism, it has to be accessible. Look at us with these headphones. I mean, trying to download information on from websites, and you don't have the correct bandwidth, it becomes impossible to actually be useful. And we need that clearinghouse mechanism to be useful because it is central to almost every single part of the BBNJ agreement to make it work. So for notifications, for information on conservation measures, for information on environmental impact assessment, for information on capacity building, that's the mechanism that will distribute the information broadly across the world. So that needs to be able to be designed to be effective to be user-friendly, and to be functional in any setting. That's also, these are basic elements, but they're elements that will drive the equity, that will drive the capacity building, and that will ensure benefit sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have to say goodbye to Janine because she is a high-level person and she have a high-level meeting right now. But thank you so much for joining us. Everything that you say was so meaningful and insightful for us. And thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. So moving to the next question, I would like to continue with you, Lorelai, because you work like you are the representative for the civil society partnership in the ocean topic. And in Latin America and across the global south, civil society has played a unique and dynamic role, driving environmental action, sharing public debate, and pushing for a stronger ocean governance framework. So this civic energy often emerges from territories that are directly confronting climate change and biodiversity crisis. So from your perspective, how can this distinctive strength from civil society in the global south become a strategic opportunity to accelerate the implementation of the BBNJ Treaty and build a more bold, inclusive, and science-driven ocean governance system?
Thank you very much, and that's a critical question in terms of inclusivity. And if we look, for instance, at the climate negotiations, inclusivity has not necessarily been their strong suit. Of course, here in Belém, there is a strive for having more local people, indigenous communities, as well as the diversity of non-state actors to be represented. But that is fairly new. And when we see that there are only few hundreds local communities represented, but 1,800 fossil fuel lobbyists, there are also some questions to be asked. But what I feel about the BBNJ and how we can galvanize really that civic movement, as you called it, from Latin America, is through the expertise and the experience. There are many, many ways of protecting the ocean. The only way to do it usefully is by protecting what we love, so knowing what we love. So first of all, we need to make sure that we have the appropriate knowledge. And hear me well, I say knowledge. I don't necessarily say science. I talk about evidence. I talk about our cultural knowledge. I talk about our, of course, scientific evidence with the IPCC and the best reports and so on and so forth, but also the experience that we have with the ocean. And if I'm being completely transparent, my mom is half Bolivian, so I actually know the energy that actually drives Latin America. And I think that this energy, if put to collective momentum, can truly make a difference. But I just want to come back to one thing that you said at the beginning that resonated so much with my experience as an ocean advocate in the climate negotiations. You said a lot of people told you, why do you talk so much about BBNJ here? Basically, you're not talking about the right topic. This has been the last 10 years of my life. So first of all, do not give up. Having a voice, being a woman with a voice, is a privilege and an honor, and people need to listen. But one thing that is really critical in terms of getting those voices heard is having the appropriate fora, rooms, and conferences to make sure that everyone has something to say. And one idea that we have discussed with the Ocean and Climate Platform with regards to the BBNJ specifically and the upcoming COP1 that will happen in a few months is about having a World Leaders Summit in the margin. Because the reality of the negotiations, it's also about thousands of people coming here for 2 weeks, working 18, 20 hours a day, without food or coffee in many places, having to discuss a very, very specific agenda that is already very overwhelming and very busy. So we can't take away time from that specific agenda of negotiations. That is paramount for the success of the BBNJ Treaty. However, we should be able, under the leadership of the country hosts and all the stakeholders involved in making BBNJ a success, to organize a World Leaders Summit in the margins of the first COP. And this has two uses. The first one would be to elevate the conversation and keep it at a higher level than the technical one that is sometimes poorly translated in the media, for instance. Every time you go to a climate COP, you will read in the media, we have 2 weeks to save the world. No, we have 2 weeks to remove brackets from 40 pages of documents. So how do you rectify the narrative? How do you keep it at a high level? But if you want the BBNJ Treaty to truly be the convener of an ocean COP, given the fragmented governance of the ocean, you need to bring everyone to the table. That means the heads of states and the ministers, of course, who are implementing at the national level. That also means the UN entities that pretend to be collaborating so well with one another when they're really not. So how do you bring the CBD, the UNFCCC, and all of the different agencies to the table, as well as the leaders from civil society, from businesses to foundations to NGOs and scientists and local communities, into a World Leaders Summit that can act as the General Assembly for the ocean, to get over the cacophony as well that we have in many meetings that are being duplicated around the globe. Bring everyone over 2 days to only talk about the ocean and how do we move forward for the protection of our blue planet. So I would invite everyone in the room to preach for a World Leaders Summit in the margins of the first COP of BBNJ.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lorelai. And thank you so much for encourage us to still talking about the ocean, because I felt a little bit sad when I received those words, because I was like, but it's important. I mean, what do you mean? And knowing that you that have been dealing with these kind of comments like for so many years still thinks the same, it's amazing. I mean, it's so inspiring for people like me that it's still like initiating the activism in the ocean. And now I would like to move to Daniel, because in youth activism in Latin America has shown strong and diverse leadership across. It's like every time I'm talking, there is a stride. So crazy. So what I was saying, okay, youth activism in Latin America has shown strong and diverse leadership across many environmental issues. However, when it comes to ocean governance, there is still significant participation gaps. We need more young ocean champions, not only in ocean-focused spaces, but also influencing broader climate and planetary action. So from your perspective, working with youth networks across Latin America and worldwide, what are the most effective ways to strengthen young ocean leaders and connect them to decision-making spaces beyond the ocean agenda, including climate negotiations like COP30?
Can you repeat the last part? Can you repeat the last part of the question?
Yes, of course. So the last part of the question was how we can strengthen young ocean leaders and connect them to decision-making spaces beyond the ocean agenda, including climate negotiations like COP30.
Thank you so much, Isma. I think that is a very reflective, insightful question. And I think Lorelai explained a lot of the things with the civil society, which I think is really good. But I think it's also in the part of the delegations and the scientific committees. Specifically for the part now in BBNJ, key aspect of BBNJ is going to be the scientific committees. Because no one lives in the high seas directly. Because islands, for example, they have an exclusive economic zone, so they're not directly contacted with the high seas. They use it, but there's no people actually to live there in that case. So in negotiation for high seas, we're going to need a lot of the scientific committees to be the voice of the evidence, because the voice of the ocean in that case is going to be the evidence. The anomalies, the climate, the acidification, the deoxygenation is going to be the evidence. So the civil society, I think, is doing an amazing role in that case, but we need to fill in the gap in the scientific committee part and in the national delegation part, which is the political part of directly in there. I think Chile is doing a great example of this also by involving young people. We have Patsy, we have you, we have many people that are already being strong influence in that case. But we need all the other people, all the other countries to see the value of involving young people in that. But that's why we have to also, how can I say this? I think we have a role of also showing our value in that case, which is, I know, for example, our scientists institute in Peru have now started putting programs for young people in that case. But one of the things that we've been asking is if these young people also can be trained forward for the eventual negotiations. And in the ratification part, for example, it's like, if we don't ratify it, we're not going to be able to be part of the scientific committee. So to be able to empower our young people, we also first need to make sure that we're going to be in these spaces in there. The same as the ISA. In the ISA, we didn't even have a Peruvian delegation because we haven't ratified the Law of the Sea Convention. Therefore, we cannot get young people in there. And therefore, we cannot get young people into the scientific and technical committees aspect of it. And so I do think that the civil society aspect is very involved. It's a very strong voice. I do think that the scientific communities and the technical commissions are very key in here. And it's because also young people I think young people are more focused now on biodiversity than the previous generations have. And it's because, I mean, science has only around 300 years of existence, so scientific concepts are relatively new. I talk about this a lot, like concept of extinction, 1785, you know, when people started being applied in education. 1830s, evolution. Planetary limits, 2012. So these are all really new concepts. So the young people are the most updated people on information. And the people that have the most updated and the better trained. Also, young people are better at disputing positions. Usually what we see in this negotiation space is we see government comes, capital comes and tells them what to do, and just a negotiator goes there or the delegate goes there and just reads exactly what he's been told from capital. And we've seen this a lot. We're like, what the heck are you saying this? It's like, oh, I don't believe in that, but they're telling me I have to do this. Or in very little times, there is feedback. So if you're there, feedback back to capital on what needs to be said. I think young people are more willing to question this. And I think those are part of the strengths of young people. First, they understand concepts much better. Second, they are much likely to dispute, talk, and argue on positions that the country make. I think what I've seen, for example, Patsy is so open to hearing different positions that she's mentioned, and I think all the other young negotiators are very open to hearing positions, and than the older generations have had. So I think that's one of the things that we have to make sure, and I think BBNJ is going to be a great opportunity for this, because first of all, we haven't had the first COP yet. So because we haven't had the first COP, we're going to be able to create the mechanisms for young people to be involved. We're going to be able to create these mechanisms as a scientific committee. We're going to be able to create these mechanisms even in the delegations, in the civil society involvement. So that's going to be very important. That's why I say who has ratified the high seas until now is going to be very important to see. But then overall, over who has ratified it and who's going to have the secretary, I think what's going to be more important is who's going to have the presidency of BBNJ. And that's where also young people are going to be key. If we really want BBNJ to really have young youth involvement, if we really want BBNJ to maintain the objectives, the first COP is going to be key on building this. So we really need to advocate, and together with all these different civil society, young organizations that are around, we need to rally and make a common position on who we want as a presidency for that. I really want Chile to be the secretary. I want Valparaiso to be the secretary, so you won't be able to have the presidency. So if you have the secretary, but I think we really need to get together and make a position as who's going to be. The good thing is, so far most of the countries that have ratified it are really pro the objectives. So we really need to advocate for a good, and that's my take. We can build this together, but we need to make sure that we have a president that has open doors for us. No.
Thank you so much, Danny. I think it's really interesting when you pointed out. This year we were doing a research of the state of on youth organizations in Latin America, and a lot of people highlighted how passionate about the nature, the environment, about community building, and I think that's an important and powerful tool that youth from Latin America and the Global South have to use for this process. And now I have a question for you both, which is about the first COP of the BBNJ. We know that the enter in force is going to be this January, and then we have 1 year for the first COP of the BBNJ to be held. And I was wondering, what are your expectations for this first COP? What outcomes are you expecting from this?
I will be fairly brief because I've already mentioned my expectations in terms of a World Leaders Summit, but I think that what we need from this first BBNJ COP as well is to keep the political momentum very high. What we have seen in other fora is that when heads of states, ministers, CEOs, and basically the important people of this planet actually show up, then it gets a lot more traction. And it gets a lot more visibility, which means accountability. The more you're visible, then the more people will track whether you are walking the talk. Because one of the issues that we're facing pretty much everywhere at the moment is the glitter effect. You know, you make fancy announcements and then there's no tracking progress across these announcements. So that's what I would expect from the first COP as well, is making sure that we have in place the appropriate monitoring to make sure that we don't just basically call out great announcements and don't really walk the talk afterwards. And in terms of the high-levelness of participation, I think that's crucial to keep the ocean high on the agenda. And that's something that we have suffered from across the global ocean governance, is just not making it to the highest level of attention from our governance systems internally at the national level. That's very important that we keep this at play. And the last thing is also a bit of an opportunity, let's say. We've had critical momentum across the three Rio conventions that were out of the Earth Summit from 1992, so climate, biodiversity, and desertification. We're also entering a momentum to build synergies across these three Rio convention. The BBNJ treaty will be the little sister of this big family of international environmental treaties. Let's make sure that the BBNJ and the first COP already addresses the issue of synergies and how do we strengthen the bridges between our climate connections, our biodiversity connection, and so on and so forth, ensuring that we move from fragmented issues to a much more coherent and holistic approach of governing a whole planet and not just siloed ecosystems. Da, 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 da. That was perfectly timed.
I wanted to add something on that case. I think you answered very well, Lorelai. Already you said most of the things. And instead, I wanted to bring the topic a little bit back into the how do we maintain the objectives of that in BBNJ. And why I mention with this is there's so much focus, for example, in BBNJ with the transfer of technology to developing countries like mine, like Peru, that's developing. But because there's a pre-assumption that all transfer of technology is going to eventually either benefit the high seas and benefit the country overall. But for example, Peru is very far behind on science, on ocean. I mean, with Chile, you guys have gone with the SOE, with the Smith Ocean Institute, deeper than 5,000 meters. In Peru, we don't even have images under 70 meters. And we were going to have that vessel come to Peru, but it was not allowed. But BBNJ will give an opportunity for countries that have ratified it to get money and to get technology. Yeah, and this has been built on an assumption that it's going to benefit the high seas and going to benefit the objectives. But I want to give an example of what happened a couple months ago. So there was a regional fisheries meeting, and there was a proposal from Chile and New Zealand to end fisheries on the Nazca Ridge. Have you guys heard of the Nazca Ridge? To end the fisheries on Nazca Ridge. And the Chile proposal was a very good proposal. Hello? But Peru, hello? I'm cutting a little bit, right? I think, okay. But Peru had received funding last year for a huge study on carbon. And what did the results say? The results showed that there was a different carbon mechanism happening from the first 600 meters under and then under 600 meters. They don't have all the data under 600 meters yet, but they do have on the first 600 meters. And they used this study, that they funded with international cooperation to oppose the proposal of Chile. They opposed the proposal of Chile by saying, well, we don't know yet if there's a complete connectivity between the surface level, the top of the ridge level, and the bottom of the ridge. Because we have proved that there's a differentiation from the surface to the top of the ridge. There's a different carbon mechanism happening from the surface to the top of the ridge. So why are you trying to ban fisheries on the whole water column of the ridge if there's a lack of information and we already proven there's no connectivity? So they're using the science that they've been funded with well-meaning intentions from the global north that have ended up undermining efforts for protection and biodiversity. And like I mentioned, the ocean has already provided millions of years of ocean services to us, but we need to, right now the debate is how do we make sure that we continue to have the ocean providing these services for free for humanity for millions of years more. So we need to make sure that the science that gets used goes to also countries in positions, in time periods that end up benefiting the objectives of the BBNJ, the objectives that we have on fisheries, the objectives that we have on everything. So that's why I'm a little bit worried also when I'm saying like if Peru ends up ratifying, we're going to putting our scientists there, they're going to end up following the interest of the country, and I don't know if that's going to end up being beneficial or not. And sometimes these really good intentions from the global north ends up undermining the objectives of the global goals at the end, because there's always an assumption of goodwill. There's always an assumption of intrinsic existence. There's always an assumption that we're going to be doing good. So this is a clear example of how really good intentions of giving us money for science that's actually hurt and bit back. And how do we prevent that from happening in BBNJ?
So now, if you allow me, I have one more question, which is about the momentum that we're having about the political polarization that the world is facing. Yeah, it's a quite complicated situation, but we know it's really important when it comes to making decisions about these international agreements. So I want to ask you, like, in a positive perspective, like, if we are able to host the technical secretary of the BBNJ in the region, how this can help to strengthen the international relations between countries and to close the gap about this polarization that we are facing right now?
Again, I'll be quick because I have to run to another meeting, but this is a crucial question. Let me share with you a quote from Al Gore from a few months back, who said about the geopolitical context that let's not forget that political leadership is a renewable resource. What I mean by that, what he meant by that, and how I understood it, is polarization has always been part of the geopolitical landscape. It won't last forever. And that's where, again, civil society, youth groups, and advocates in general have a critical role to play in the way that we frame an issue, in the way that we stand up for values and principles. And I think that this is a question that has been asked quite a bit throughout this COP30, given the state of multilateralism at the moment. And let's be very honest here, multilateralism is under threat, science is under threat, civil society and activism is very much under threat, that should drive our determination to fight and not be scared. So that's the first thing. The dynamics of power, they're evolving. And that's actually what I thought was very exciting when I was studying international relations, is how do you play around with those little strings? And you can see as well how that moves in terms of the stakeholders at play. Today, countries, even in the global north, it's an absolute chaos. I'm French. We've had like 5 elections in the last 5 months. We barely have a president. I mean, it's a, excuse my French, but it's a shit show. It's part of it. But in the meantime, that also shows the limits of some systems. And that's something that we're very much experiencing in the COP processes as well. And there's an entire agenda at COP30 on reforming Conference of the Parties. Because in the last decades, the dynamics of powers and influence have evolved. Countries are not the only one that can drive change. They're not the only ones who can implement it. We need civil society, and we know why, but we also need the private sector. And I think the polarization question goes both ways. Of course, there's the geopolitics, and I've mentioned that, but also in terms of good and evil kind of thing. And we need to work with the private sector to drive the transformative change across political, social, and economic systems. You won't convince all of the private sector to get on board. I mean, Total and all of the other fossil fuel companies may not be your first movers, but some of them will. And when geopolitical context and, you know, consensus is being challenged, then you work with coalitions of the willings. I don't care that everyone agrees with me. I'll just make sure I work with the ones who are willing to get their hands dirty for the interest of good, of course. So I think that there's a threat. We need to be conscious of it. But, oh my God, we need to come together and fight it, because humanity has never been so good and so interesting and so powerful than under threat.
To answer that question, Isma, I think BBNJ, it's a key moment on that. For example, in it's the first political treaty, global treaty that has been, I think, in the past years, that has been so high level in a way. And I was just telling Congressman here that this is going to be the first treaty that he's going to ratify during his 5-year period. It's the first treaty that they're going to ratify, so I think it's going to be a very good treaty. And to ratify, we need both sides. We need every party to ratify it. And one of the speeches that we were using a lot in Peru is like, you know, this treaty has been ratified by Milei from Argentina. You know, this treaty has been ratified by Noboa from Ecuador, also right. And this treaty has also been ratified by Boric in Chile. So I think it's a good treaty to show us that, hey, biodiversity, it's a common ground that we all need to focus on. And I think that's going to be, I think in there we're going to have to also be very careful in not alienating people in the High Seas Treaty, because we've done that a lot with alienating people that doesn't think like us, alienating people that maybe are not up to the task or not very into the conservation agenda as us. We need to make sure, like Lorelai mentioned, even the private sector to be part and to see this as a common ground. I think if we start partializing and alienating people that don't understand the treaty, or alienating people that don't understand climate, we're going to end up losing more than we're going to end up winning. So I think the High Seas Treaty, and the reason the High Seas is so important, and it's because it's the last frontier where humans have not entered. If you read the data on biodiversity loss, you're going to see that biodiversity loss trend has always gone where humans have gone since we left Africa 70,000 years ago, first through hunting and then through loss of habitat. And that's what the science says of biodiversity loss. Most biodiversity loss occurs with hunting and then with loss of habitat. So we have a period of biodiversity loss of over 10,000 years that we have been losing biodiversity. So the biodiversity crisis is over 10,000 years old. It's not relatively new, but we're repeating the climate change narrative that it's only 200 years old, but it's not. The biodiversity crisis has started since we left Africa 70,000 years ago. We were only 1 million humans. But in that case, the trend of biodiversity loss in marine ecosystem is similar. It started with hunting or fisheries, and then is now through loss of habitat also. Acidification, pollution, it's a loss of habitat. Overfishing is loss of habitat. Trolling fishing is loss of habitat. But the reason the ocean is the last place to have loss of biodiversity, the loss of biodiversity in the ocean is only around 350 years, around there, is because the ocean has been such a big frontier for human entering there. It has been so difficult for humans to enter. Just a couple cultures have been able to actually dominate passing through the ocean, but almost no culture has dominated going under 200 meters. So that's why under 200 meters of the ocean, we still have a huge amount of unknown biodiversity that's mostly intact. You know, the deep sea is mostly intact. So that's why it's such a common ground, because it's the last place on Earth where humans have been able to enter, the high seas and then the deep seas. And it's a place that we have the first time a period that we can take care and plan as we go along. And then with all of us, that if we're going to be there since the first COP, we're going to be able to build it from the ground up.
Thank you so much, Danny. I think that one highlight that I take from this side event is that we still need a lot of things to do, a lot of things to fight for, but not everything is about that. We also take some time to celebrate, and today is a really special day for you, because if you don't know, today is Danny's birthday. Yes. Woo! So I invite you all to sing happy birthday to Danny, and we also have a little surprise for him. So please, my team could bring this small cake to sing for you. We don't have candles, sadly, but yeah. So how many here speak Spanish? So please raise your hand. Okay, so we can sing in Spanish. Happy birthday? Okay, amazing. So, at the count of 3, we're going to start singing happy birthday. So, 1, 2, 3. Cumpleaños feliz. Te deseamos a ti. Cumpleaños Daniel. Que los cumplas feliz. Thank you so much for everyone to joining us today in this side event. I hope that you enjoy as much as I did, and see you soon working for the oceans, because we still have a lot of things to do. So thank you so much, and please enjoy the catering that we have prepared for you all. So see you all. Bye.